Hi, I'm Annabeth, and I would love to talk to you about how to practice music. It seems in some ways like a really straightforward thing, but I started formal music lessons when I was 6 years old, and it wasn't until grad school that any of my teachers actually gave me any specifics of how to practice to actually maximize my improvement. So a lot of my improvement was kind of luck. So I want to give you a very detailed explanation of exactly how to practice. If you want to get better, you need to practice. It's like that part is really straightforward. It reminds me of when I had a personal trainer, and she said to me at one point, she was like, you can come in here and work your can off, and it's great, but if you just go home and sit on the couch and eat McDonald's, there's not a lot that I can do for you. It's better than nothing, but there's not a lot that I can actually do for you. And practicing is super similar. I've often had students who come in and they have spent no time between their lessons, actually being with the instrument, interacting with the instrument. And there's very little that I can actually do. There's stuff, but there's very little progress that they can actually make in that context. There is this kind of trick where it doesn't matter as much how much time you spend practicing. It matters a lot more how you use your time. You can spend a very little amount of time practicing, but if you do it really often, you're going to see a lot of improvement. So for example, if you practice for 50 minutes, once a week, you're not going to get anywhere near as much progress if you practice for 10 minutes once a day for 5 days. And you're going to get way more progress if you practice for 5 minutes twice a day for 5 days. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. One reason, for example, with piano or guitar, ukulele, things like that, some of the muscles that we're actually training when we do this stuff, when we do music, are very, very small muscles. And we're actually kind of learning muscle memory. Our brain understands what we're supposed to do a lot faster than our muscles know how to do it, can just do it on command. So we're actually just giving our muscles this repetition so that they get to learn how to do it. And those little muscles kind of hit their saturation point of learning pretty quickly, 5-10 minutes into an activity. And those little muscles have learned everything they're gonna learn right then. But it doesn't take much time to hit the reset button. 30 minutes, an hour of doing just something else and coming back and putting another 5 minutes in, the muscles are going to be fresh, and they're gonna learn again. Then you break, then they learn again, then you break, then they learn again. But if you just sit down for 50 minutes once and you practice, you're actually only getting that 5 minutes worth of learning. So what to do when you actually practice? It's wise to start with some sort of warm-up, and a lot of that is dependent on the instrument. And I'll get into that in a future video. But for example, on an instrument, let's say with my kid piano students, I just start them out with scales, just this little 5-finger scale up and down. And so the first thing they do when they practice is just do your scales. For singing, you're gonna need to warm up your voice, right? So that can be the start, and again, that's gonna depend on your level. And a lot of kind of what you can be looking at the beginning also during those warm-ups is paying attention to technique. How what is the position of your hands while you're playing? Like what is the looseness of your neck while you're singing? Again, technique is very instrument specific, but that's one of the things that during these kind of rote, like, oh, I've done this 100 times. So the warm-up itself is not challenging. So that's a really great time to focus on some of the specifics and make sure your technique is in place. Okay, so for beginners and kids, what I like to recommend is, like, I always say, like, as their teacher, I always say a very specific thing of like, this is how to practice this week. And I like to make sure it's something they could accomplish in 5 minutes or less. I know there's a lot of parents that put their 6-year-old down at the piano bench. They're like, it's time to practice. And then they're like, okay, 30 minutes at the piano. But like, if you're 6 years old, like, unless you're a prodigy, like, you don't have 30 minutes worth of stuff to practice. You really don't yet. And as we talked about before, you're not actually getting 30 minutes worth of benefit out of that. And so what you accidentally end up doing as a parent in that situation is turning the piano bench into the timeout chair, because they're just sitting there feeling miserable. So I tell, for example, my beginner kids, I say, do your song 3 times in a row, right? So of course you've done your warm-up, you did your scales, then just play your song 3 times in a row. And if you notice you got something wrong, like, try not to get it wrong the next time, but just do it 3 times in a row. And honestly, if you just have a little bit, a 6-year-old's worth of intentionality about trying not to play wrong notes, do the song 3 times in a row, you do that once a day, you're gonna have improvement. Improvement will occur. And then what I like to say, especially with kids, it's like, practice first, and that's this thing that's gonna take 5 minutes or less, and then play if you want to. You can either just practice for 5 minutes and then leave the piano bench and go do something else. Or you practice for 5 minutes, and then is there something you just want to do for fun on the instrument? You did your practice, great. Now play with your instrument. And I think that's one of the most important parts, is that as a teacher especially, don't assign so much work that they don't have the time to play and like fall in love with their instrument and spend time with the instrument and just mess around and experiment. And maybe they're a future songwriter, they're gonna find something new. Just also spend time playing, and don't make the playing an assignment. That's like if you want to. And ideally, you're only working on an instrument if you feel like drawn to it, and then you'll want to play. When you start to get to the intermediate level, I do change my recommendations for practicing. I don't just say 3 times in a row, because songs at this point are getting harder. It's kind of weird. There's going to be parts of the song that are just easy and kind of come naturally, and then there's going to be parts of the song that are harder, and then a part that's easy again. And so I like to recommend what I call the +3 system. So you take a small, challenging chunk of the song, and it's called +3 because you have to get it right 3 more times than you get it wrong, right? So you play it once, you get it right, that's +1. You play it once, you get it wrong, you're back to 0. You play it once, you get it wrong, you're -1, right? You build up, you build down. And if it gets too complicated, if you're down in the -5s, then maybe your chunk is too big, or maybe you only need to work on rhythm, or maybe you only need to work on notes. You need to narrow it down so it's something you can get a +3 on relatively quickly. And sometimes I like to say, find a hard section, do a +3, then play the whole song. Then find what's the hard section now, do +3 there, then play the whole song. And then at that intermediate level is where you want to start paying more attention to how long you're practicing. And I like to limit it to no more than 30 minutes a time. Now again, that's the practicing. You get to play all you want. So you practice for 30 minutes at a time max. If you want to do that 5 minute, but you do it way, way more often, cool, great, that'll work too. But at the intermediate level, you are going to be doing a little bit more digging in, and so you're going to need a little bit more time. That 5 minutes isn't going to give you as much on the intermediate stuff. So practice changes again at the advanced level. So by that point, you're actually like trying to work a piece of music or a technique. You're working it kind of into your bones. And that can become a really personalized process. By that point, you've spent enough time with your instrument that you kind of know the things that come more easily to you. You're going to spend less time on those things just because they're going to happen. And then you kind of know the parts that are harder for you. You're going to spend more time on that. And at that point, you're really balancing learning the piece or the technique with focusing on kind of how you're doing it. Like if I'm focusing on rhythm, but I'm like doing it with bad technique, then I'm also practicing bad technique. So you start to really find these balances, and that's where working with your teacher can help you figure out quite how to navigate that. You're probably spending a lot more time practicing at that point. I think the most advanced kind of that I've ever heard of, I had a friend who was a violinist for the New York Philharmonic, and he used to require for himself that he said, I haven't learned a piece until I can play it 10 times in a row with no mistakes. So like the whole piece, no mistakes, 10 times in a row. That's just like unheard of. It's just insane. So that's super, super high level advanced. I hope you have really retained a lot of helpful information about how to practice. Please let me know if you have any additional questions. And again, that's something that you can go to your specific teacher and ask about. I'll be doing a lot more videos, hopefully sharing a lot more information with you. Thanks.